In a nutshell, funding for any initiative, as you just illustrated, has to be layered. There is no one funding source that will cover everything. There's no pot of gold that magically appears and covers everything. So we do look at grants. We do look at zero interest or low interest long-term loans. We do look at venture capitalism. We do look at charitable donations. But my contention is we exhaust all of that before we even start talking about raising a tax.
Here's one. Let's go with the, you made a statement, and you can clear me up if these are things on your website that you want to elaborate on. No property tax on a residential property that's under 5 acres. Mm-hmm. Is that right on your site? I got that correct?
And let me clarify. Every word on my site I authored. I do all my own IT web work, so there's nothing on there that anyone else.
And this is all on your site. Yep. This came from your site. And I told you today when we started, we'll discuss things that you put out and give you a chance to no income tax for retirees, mm-hmm. right? Corporate tax increase, mm-hmm. right? Let's go with that right there, because here's what I would see the pushback. And I've studied the property tax. I read every bill that they put out this past year, all right? And I read the bill that we did a constitutional amendment 2 years ago, the last time, that would cap the rate of increase on evaluations of property.
Correct.
To cap, but then we gave everyone an opt-out.
Mm-hmm. So in this past
in my words, it was useless.
In this last legislative session, they did it again. They capped the amount you can. First of all, they promised elimination and/or reduction of your property tax. What we ended up actually getting out of the legislative session that ended in April is, we're only going to allow your property tax to increase by 3%.
Right.
So they promise this, to deliver that.
Okay, but if you do some of these things in reducing property tax and these kind of things, how do you meet the county's budget? Mm-hmm. How do you do this? What do you do over here? How do you find the balance? Because that seems to be the argument. Because for me, to me, a fiscal conservative, and I'm going to speak for myself because I'm a fiscal conservative, you start talking about maybe cutting budgets, or do you need to spend all the money you're spending? You got to have a balance, to me.
That's the second part of that, is where I lean more, in that the stupid spending aspect. To illustrate, the property tax for seniors, is it Kentucky or Virginia has a program that has eliminated and/or reduced property tax rates for seniors. I don't know all the nuts and bolts of it. I've read the law, but I don't know all the internal mechanics. But it's been done. It's implemented. It is working in those states. Let's copy that. Let's take their idea, apply it to Georgia, and implement it here. One of the other, I mix up which state has which, but one of the states has an income tax exemption for veterans and retirees. Let's duplicate their policy, implement that here. And finding how we're going to pay for it, the first thing I'm going to do is, how did they pay for it? If it's working for one state, it will work here. And in none of my issues do I ever say, I'll just raise taxes to pay for it all. I am absolutely dead set against that. My priorities on funding some of the initiatives I propose. One, we'll find whatever federal grants and federal subsidies there are to support it. Number two would be finding venture capital and charitable investors. Number three would be donations from various foundations that apply to that issue. And the last thing on there would be, okay, we've exhausted all of these other options and we're still short of the mark. So if we're going to have to raise a tax, only raise it for the amount needed to cover that cost. These blanket taxation numbers don't work because you can't apply a median percentage to the entire state and say everybody's going to pay X percent of this tax or that tax or another tax, because all the variables don't get taken into account. We have dirt poor counties and we have very affluent counties. The median between that county and the other is vastly different. So to try to put a blanket solution on these things, it doesn't work. It works perfectly for the 30-second soundbite where you can claim, I'm going to create or eliminate this tax. But if you've read my website, and as you pointed out, correct me if I'm wrong, I think I'm the only candidate out there who's actually saying how I'm going to do what I say I'm going to. Think of revenue as a three-legged stool. Each leg is property tax, sales tax, income tax. If you eliminate one of those taxes, if you eliminate a leg on a three-legged stool, what happens to the stool?
That's what I'm saying. So
this trade-off, and part of my dissatisfaction, anger, grievance with the way the state has been handling this is every solution to a tax or funding issue always seems to come down to, well, we'll just do another sales tax. We'll add a penny to this. We'll do a splost, flossed, T-splost. We're always ready to add a sales tax to compensate for these magnanimous promises that aren't realistic. So, as you said, property owners will definitely benefit from reducing or eliminating the property tax. But what about the renters, the non-property tax owners, and everybody else who spends money in the given county? I, as a property owner, will save on my property tax bill, but how much am I going to spend when the tax on literally everything I buy in a given year, food, clothes, gas, hardware, appliances, clothing, school supplies for the kids, when the taxes for literally everything you buy get increased to accommodate one of those stool legs, you have an unfair and regressive tax system.
Well, you have a, and I want to get past this. You shift the burden.
Yep.
It's the bottom line.
You're not solving anything. You're
shifting the burden.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
if you have $1 million and you still want $1 million when you're done, but you take $200,000 over here, all you've done is sewed that part of the blanket to the bottom of this part of the blanket, and you still have the same length in the blanket, period.
When I mentioned about stupid spending, and I'll be very brief about this, but this is such an excellent example of the kind of spending I'm going to attack. Back in the 70s, Georgia bought 2 tracts of 10,000 acres outside of Atlanta with the intention or desire for it to be a second airport. Since then, there have been 5 feasibility studies done on that 20,000 acres to determine whether an airport can go there or not. On average, those, and when you account for inflation and cost of living, et cetera, over the years, over the decades, the average cost of those studies has been around $225,000. Every one of those feasibility studies resulted in a report. Nothing, and I say this, absolutely nothing was done with any of those reports. They were shelved in a drawer and nothing's been done since. They want to do another feasibility study on that same tract, 2 tracts of land. I'm not an architect, I'm not a geologist, I'm not a real estate professional, but one thing I am certain of, those 20,000 acres have not moved since the 1970s. But we keep spending money stupidly to assess whether we're going to use it for another airport. If I were in charge, sell the property, use the funds for a better purpose.
All right, so do you believe in a capitalist system?
To a degree.
What degree? Define that.
Capitalism works when it is not exploited, when it is not imbalanced between those who can afford rampant capitalism versus those who just have to suffer the consequences of it.